Let's welcome on stage Toeh, Web3 lawyer, with the topic Legal Framework Web3 in Singapore. Welcome.
Yes, great speech.
It's a great event.
Really? Thank you.
The vibe and energy is awesome.
Thank you. Really looking forward to talking to you guys about the processes, about how we've kept ourselves safe. I used to run a project and in 2017, and the first thing we looked at our lawyer and said, how do we make sure we can do a token sale and not go to jail? I think some of that is now it's not going to jail, it's now how can we stay out of the SEC's crosshairs. So a lot of you guys are engineers and builders here, so I wanted to speed run you guys through the past and future of legal structures in the crypto space, and at the same time talk about what we can do now to keep everybody safe and building. So some legal disclaimers. I am not a lawyer, I am not your lawyer. It's in red and it's underlined, so it's really important.
I will share the
I am a Singapore trained lawyer. I generally run companies, but because legal risk in crypto is such a big part of operational risk, I am current on crypto laws because the projects I advise, the project I work on, nobody wants to fall foul of the law. So what I usually do is I structure for my own projects, and then I get a real lawyer to look at it. Because I did train as a lawyer, I do the tax structuring, I do the corporate formats, but after that, I hand it off to somebody who actually gets paid to do that and assumes the risk. And is licensed to do that.
you later.
So what are legal structures? A lot of different companies and countries have different structures. I know Vietnam has slightly different legal structures. Singapore has different legal structures. Unfortunately, Singapore legal structures are dominant in Southeast Asia because the joke in Singapore, if you read to Token 2049, is that there are more VCs than builders. There are more VCs than devs. And that is true. Now, part of the reason is in Singapore, it's very, very fast to spin up any one of these legal structures for business. It's generally 3 hours and $300 for a company. Partnerships are less than that. But when you do a legal structure for a business, you have to understand what risk and what kind of management control that you're doing. So if you're just running a small bubble tea stand, then or coffee stand, sole proprietorship is fine because your liability is limited to bad stomach. The next thing is partnership is if you're just a few friends who are building together and your services company and you don't expect a lot of liability, then it's also possible because management, risk, and all the decisions and work aren't separated. But if you're doing anything more complex in the space, you're raising capital from outside, you're expecting workers, you're expecting to scale, then you should look at a company structure. Vietnam does have company structures. The tax in Vietnam, I think, is a standard 20%. Singapore is very attractive for the simple reason the first 3 years, the first 100,000 of income is exempt. If you're not bringing the income back to Singapore, you're earning the money in the US, you pay people in Vietnam, and the money stays outside of Singapore, that money is also not taxed. And then let's get to DAOs. Because DAOs are super popular. A lot of Web3 projects have structured as DAOs. Now the problem is DAOs don't really mean anything. They can be any one of these things. And they should really fall under one of these legal structures. But at the same time, I believe DAOs are actually the future of work. DAOs, as you can see, these are what DAOs and governance coins do. So they offer liquidity as well as upside for contributors and token holders. So we should actually look at how DAOs are structured. And I think there is a way to structure safely. I will talk through the ENS DAO example. And if you want to do a DAO, you should get yourself a really good lawyer. But these are what DAOs can do in terms of liquidity and balance sheet. The market cap is 13.5B. So the broad categories of DAOs, depending on what kind of Web3 project you're doing, it could fall under any one of these categories. So, I'm just going to leave this up here, you can read it. You can buy and build things, Raid Guild, all these other DAOs. They help projects build. It's sort of a cooperative structure. Then there are ones that actually operate software. and then there are outright charities. Now, what DAOs offer above normal legal structures is they give a flatter structure. Most DAOs hire extensively from their Discord or their community forums. And because they hire from the forums, they can hire people that intensely align. A lot of the people in Bankless or in other DAOs got their start being noisy on the forums. But because they are noisy on the forums, you know who's aligned, you know who gets it, you know who is going to be a good hire because you don't have to explain what your organization is about. And then lastly, you don't have to hire people upright for a big fat salary. You can give them something small, get them started, see if they're any good, and get them on a work to earn basis. So, I mean, I'm very bullish on DAOs because I believe that they're the future of work. If you go back to where we were, joint stock companies started about 400 years ago, but only crystallized in final form 200 years ago because they're set up to do international trade. Large, complex businesses that go internationally, that have many stages of work. I believe that DAOs are actually the future of how work can do. Now, the other issue that DAOs do is that they can have unlimited contributors, either for time, for money. So Uniswap DAO holders, there are 310,000 of them. Pseudonymity, a lot of people that work with DAOs are just an animal picture, or an ugly ape, or some kind of punk. They have radical transparency. They take board decisions that you would normally not do, but they do it all in real time. If you've seen the MakerDAO fights, it's quite intense. And it happens on Twitter, it happens on governance. And there's a lot of experimentation about how voting should happen. When we vote, most of the time we're used to first past the post. People are experimenting with, if you speak more, should your vote have more weight? So should your vote or your shares be tied to your reputation? So there's a lot of experimentation around threshold, forum, about making better decisions. It's not necessarily faster, but they're finding out something. So this is why DAOs matter. I believe that DAOs are digital native organizations to do digital tokens, digital services, paid with digital payments. And it is fundamentally a different way of work that we are experimenting with. It's new, it's under 5 years old, we're trying to speed run companies. And this is just the beginning. It's the proto-digital version of a joint stock company, borderless, transacted in non-fiat currency, entirely online decision making, radical transparency, jurisdictions, and I think that jurisdictions with the most DAOs will actually stand. Now the issue is that most DAOs don't have a legal structure, and this is a problem. I want to bring you guys to a US case study called Uki DAO. This is fairly new, it was filed 22nd September. But essentially the CFTC, this is the Commission on Federal Trade in Commodities, filed suit against Uki. It's an unincorporated association. So as long as you exercise the governance token on Uki to vote, you are a member of an unincorporated association and you're jointly and severally liable for all the debts and liabilities of the association. So all token holders are liable for anything that they took under, including anything that they did wrong. So you have to make full restitution every customer or investor whose funds were received or utilized in violation of the CFTC order. Now, this is not fun because many of us have Uniswap tokens, many of us have governance tokens, and it's created a chilling effect. If you are an unincorporated association, there are ways to stay safe, but there are a lot of DAOs with very, very similar fact situations. For example, MakerDAO, SushiSwap, PancakeSwap, this is just the start of litigation. Because if the CFTC enforces successfully against Uki, all of these other companies will have to fall into line or will face the same liability. So if you are considering a DAO, don't do it unless you have a legal structure. Now, there are legal structures that you can do to avoid Uki DAO if you are structuring a token project. Don't work with Americans. Structure to avoid US entities, US persons at any stage, so you don't have SEC or CFTC exposure. Pseudo-anonymity. If you're doing anything with ZK after Tornado Cash, cryptography, consider going dark. Consider going pseudo-anonymous, plausible deniality. Find a good lawyer who's crypto-native. A crypto-native lawyer will understand it when you tell them, ask them what a consensus mechanism is, and they'll be like, yes, consensus mechanisms are important and they do this. They shouldn't give you a blank stare. And they have formed successful DAOs that aren't at risk of litigation. And a non-US lawyer. Non-US lawyers tend to structure for the US, and that creates liability. So a good lawyer will create room for experimentation on the token, but still allow that. So, for example, ENS DAO has a two-layer company structure. They have a Cayman Island Foundation structure that sits at the top level that issues tokens, and then they have another services company that on their behalf holds property, bank accounts, assets, can pay devs, can pay people for work done in fiat, can enter into contracts. It is a legal issue. So for example, recently when GoDaddy took away, I think, ETH-Link, the Singapore company that is owned by ENS DAO could sue GoDaddy for that. It was the appropriate person. But if you're unincorporated DAO, unincorporated association, it is very hard to sue because you don't know who's in charge. So legal structures, you should set a jurisdiction, set a legal structure, set governance, which is what happens if you can't agree. When do you guys all rage quit? How do you guys make decisions? Is it a board of directors? Do you delegate? All these basic things that you can make. And then you have clean structures that I previously talked about, a two-layer structure, one that's offshore that can issue tokens, and then an international structure. Now, you generally have an offshore structure because of tax issues. Most of the international jurisdictions don't tax people for sales of tokens. For example, if you do sell onshore in Japan, there's a 17% tax. If you use an offshore entity to sell, there generally is no tax. And then you should have an operational company in a neutral jurisdiction. Singapore is considered a neutral jurisdiction. A lot of crypto companies do use Singapore. Dubai is also up and coming. Gibraltar theoretically is also possible, but you should choose somewhere where the service providers are reasonable and the risk of litigation and the laws are clear. So, I have been talking about how DAOs need a legal structure. This is me on Twitter. I will speed run you through. If you want to follow me on Twitter, this is my Twitter handle. But essentially, the equivalent of getting a good legal jurisdiction for your DAO or for your legal structures is essentially, it's like hardening a kernel. You get exactly what you need to do the thing you need. So you should be legally compliant and legal engineering. So this is the entire thread of it. So the next question is, how should I structure my project? So these are the questions you need to ask yourself if you're structuring a project, thinking of a project or investing in a project, which is, what are you really building? Are you building, like those earlier categories of DAO, are you building a charity? Are you building infrastructure? Are you building like just a smart contract consultancy for people that are taking fees? Who are you raising money from? VCs, whales, ICO tokens. If you're raising from VCs, most of the Southeast Asian structures will be good. Unfortunately, like Grab, a lot of the companies eventually end up having a Singapore top-level company because VCs have more confidence putting into a Singapore structure because it's quite easy to settle the disputes. Most of the big VCs, Sequoia, they have regional coverage, but all of their HQ are in Singapore. If you are doing ICO tokens, think of another structure outside of Singapore because of tax issues. And then where is your revenue model from? Where is it earned from? Where is the profit booked? Because that will also determine where you should put the companies. So for example, there are subsidiary companies in each country. And then who you are working with. Where do people live and work? Are they all in Vietnam? Are they distributed and remote? Because if you have people working in Vietnam and they're taking fiat, then you're going to need a Vietnamese company at some stage to pay people through bank accounts, through payments, unless they are willing to take USDC or other aspects, or other payments. The answer is it depends. What legal structure should you use? It all depends on your business. So choose a country with good taxation and dispute resolution. Allows you to have a bank account, sue and be sued. It's easy for investors to understand and put money into. And in crypto and Web2, it sometimes involves two companies in different countries. Questions? Do we have time for questions? Anybody have questions?
Okay.
With the recent clamping down of MES, is Singapore still the best place to start a token project?
Well, as long as you're not a scam, it's generally fine. It also depends on what your project is doing. Are you a cooperative for artists and you're just helping artists buy and sell their art? I think it should not be a problem. MAS also has an open door policy. We run projects in Singapore, go in and talk to them. They don't have hard rules, but they do make an effort to talk to all the projects about where they should go. So operational company in Singapore is still recommended. You just make sure it has no crypto links. You're just a software services company.
Any other questions? Okay, so I think that's pretty much it for Web3 legal framework in Singapore. Thank you, Karen. Let's give a round of applause. I think this topic is very, very interesting and very helpful. Okay, so I mean, like we have been listening to workshops like all day long. Do you guys have any, like topic to share about and like share your feedback and thoughts on our workshop today? Please feel free to give us comments.